My name is Josh Gottry. Welcome to today's weekly lesson. Today we're going to talk about accents, and more specifically we're going to talk about different approaches or types of accents that you might encounter or choose to use in your playing. Now I'm going to use the gross oversimplification of talking about marching accents versus concert accents. And the reason why I use that with most of my private students is quite simply because that's the reason that they're playing one type of accent or another, is the situation in which those accents occur. Obviously, in a concert hall, this is a place that's acoustically designed to maximize every subtlety and make sure that every nuance is heard or communicated effectively from the performer to the audience. In a marching context, most of these performances are outdoors in a stadium or inside a gym, and those are certainly not acoustically designed to emphasize those nuances or subtleties and communicate those effectively from the performer to the audience. So it is the performer's job to exaggerate those subtleties or those nuances to make them not so subtle, in which case accents are typically approached very differently than they would be in those concert settings. Okay, so there's a little explanation as to why I use those two terms, but again, neither of these accents is exclusive to one situation or the other, but just most often is found in that situation for the reasons that I gave. So let's talk about these two types of accents, how to develop control over them, and how to use them both in your practice and performance. So first, let's define the two types. So a concert accent is generated by a little extra force and typically doesn't involve a dramatic change in stick height to execute that accent. So if I play just a simple 16th note accent permutation pattern, where I start with a nice easy check pattern, put an accent on the first note, and I can keep going through that in sets of two, sets of one, so on and so forth. You notice as I play this, these are what I would consider to be concert accents. The emphasis, the slight bit of extra force or pace I'm putting on my stroke to generate those accents does not create a significant difference in the height of the stick to generate the accent. As a result, the overall volume with which I'm playing stays relatively constant, and I could do that at a lower height as well. And again, I'm trying to strive to make sure that my height remains the same. I'm just putting a little bit of extra punch on that stroke. Now in contrast, what I would refer to as a marching accent or a drumline accent is going to require two adjustments to the given bass volume that I'm playing. Number one, the accents come up in height, but number two, the non-accents very significantly drop in height to create a more dramatic contrast between the accented note and the non-accented note. Often in a marching context, very specific stick heights are given for these accents and non-accents, or passages where there are no accents. So in that same situation, my check pattern may still be about 6 inches in height, but then as soon as I get to the accents, my accents are going to come up, let's say to 9 inches. My non-accents are going to drop down, let's say to 3 inches, to create a pretty dramatic contrast. And you can see immediately that there's a much greater contrast between the accent and non-accent in this approach than in the earlier approach that I defined as a concert snare drum accent or a concert context accent. Now, again, I want to emphasize that neither of these are exclusive to one situation or the other, and neither one is right or wrong in any given situation unless you're not using your ear to define what context your accents best fit into in that situation. So I guess there is a wrong if you're just not paying attention. But it's important to make sure that when you think about, well, what am I trying to generate here? Am I trying to create a subtlety with my accent, a little bit of emphasis, because that subtlety is going to be picked up in that context, whether it be because of the performance venue or because of the type of piece? Or am I looking for very dramatic accents to emphasize the contrast between non-accent and accent? For certainly some drummy percussion ensemble pieces and even some concert band pieces will require very dramatic contrasts between accent and non-accent, so that marching approach to an accent would be more appropriate than a subtle concert type accent to really generate what the composer is looking for in that context, because the piece would indicate a degree of contrast expected. So now that you've know kind of what I'm talking about these two types of accents, the best thing I can recommend is to practice both in any exercise that you might approach. So I used, that was a 16th note accent pattern. I could use what would be a triplet grid accent pattern as well and work on that same thing. So here's that in a concert approach to accents. Or more of a marching approach to those accents. And if you take any passage, whether it be working on something out of Accents and Rebounds by George Lawrence Stone, or working on the Regimen book by Sean Tilburg that I recommended several lessons ago, and look at the accent passages in that, you can take and approach those either in that more marching dramatic contrast style or that concert style, and really develop the touch to be able to do either. And then of course you can apply this far beyond a practice pad, whether it's on a snare drum, on a drum set, on a keyboard percussion instrument, or timpani, or any other percussion instrument that you may encounter with accent passages. But certainly use your ear to tell you whether or not the underlying notes, those non-accented notes, are still supposed to fill up the sound as the dynamic would indicate, or whether or not they're supposed to drop out of the way to really create a clearer texture for the accents to be, front and center and really obvious to the listener's ear. Hope that helps. Have a great week.